me introduce my wife, Mary Pat, who's with me as well tonight. Well, good evening. I will tell you this is a significantly better scene than when I left in New Jersey. So thank you all for having me here in beautiful South Carolina. I'm happy to be back and looking forward to talking to you all tonight. And I'll try to move a little bit this way, so for the folks who are getting the sun in their eyes, they don't have to look right into it. And then when we get the sun moved, we'll do a little bit better. So I want to thank you all for coming. Appreciate your interest in what's going on in this country. And I'm going to start off tonight just by talking about what's going on in the world right now. You know, look, all these things are connected, everybody. Everything we see going on right now is connected. What's going on in Ukraine, what's now going on in Israel, what we see going on in the South China Sea, all that stuff is connected. And it happens when America starts to pull back from leading the world. When we start to pull back from leading the world, other bad actors fill in. And the bad actors, come on, don't worry about it. Bad actors, that's okay. All right, the bad actors are a foursome right now. China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And they are all working together. You got to know that Russia thought it was very helpful for Hamas and Iran to be involved in attacking Israel, getting the United States to have another thing we have to pay attention to. And what they hope is that they'll distract us from Ukraine. The Russians want to make sure that they're able to continue to push forward in what they're doing in Ukraine. And in Israel, what we need to understand is that these folks are never going to change their tune. Folks like Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah, what they want is for Israel to be gone. There's no in between for them. It is the destruction of Israel and the elimination of the only democracy in the Middle East and the elimination of the Jewish homeland. And in the same way there's no in-between for them, there should be no in-between for us. And what I worry about watching this race right now is that, putting Donald Trump aside for a second, we'll talk about him in a little bit. But with the other folks in the race, they're all trying to have it in between. In between. They want to run against Donald Trump, but they don't want to say anything negative about him. They want to replace him as the party's nominee, but they're willing to raise their hand on a debate stage and say they'll support him even if he's a convicted felon. My candidacy is much different because I believe that there should be no in-between. That we have to make a decision right now about what kind of country we want to be. And that's why character is the single most important issue in this race. It is the single most important issue in this race. Because here's the thing, no one could have predicted that Russia was going to invade Ukraine. No one could have predicted that Hamas, after a number of years of not doing it, was going to invade Israel. No matter what questions you all ask me tonight, and I'm looking forward to them, there are going to be things that will happen if I become president that we couldn't have anticipated sitting out here in South Carolina on this Saturday night in October. And so, how can you have confidence in what I'll do if you weren't able to answer? Get an answer from me on it. The way you can know is to know in your heart, become convinced that I'm the kind of person who will represent this country and make decisions on behalf of it in a way that has character behind it. Who are we as Americans, and what do we want our country to be? We know what we've been. Now the question is, what will be going forward? I don't think I want a country that doubts what our role in the world is. that questions what our role in the world is. I met recently with the Japanese ambassador to the United States, and I asked him if I got elected and I met with your prime minister during the transition and asked him if there's only one thing I could do to help Japan as president, what would it be? He got a big smile on his face and sat back in the chair and he said, "That's easy, Governor." He said, "Lead." When America leads the world, Japanese citizens sleep soundly. And I would tell you that most of the other ambassadors around the world would say exactly the same thing to you, that we need an America that is helping to lead the world and set an example for the world. And that's why character matters, everybody. Look, I'm pretty angry about what's happening in Washington, D.C. in general and what's happening right now. And we should be embarrassed as a party, quite frankly, about what's going on in the House of Representatives. I mean, these guys and women look like a group of 11th graders trying to pick the junior class president rather than the Speaker of the House. Someone asked me on TV on Thursday, "Who do you want to be Speaker?" I said, "I don't care. Just pick someone. Just pick someone, because Israel needs help. Ukraine needs help. Our southern border needs to be secured. And Taiwan needs to be armed now so we're not catching up later. We need to send a message to the Chinese now that Taiwan will be ready if they come." All those things need to be done. And instead, we're arguing over, who's going to get the big office with the view of the National Mall to make sure their ego is okay. Make a decision. Be done already. That's what we need to do. And it's embarrassing that we can't do that. And that's what happens when you have selfish leadership of this party. Now, let's just take one example. Donald Trump said he endorsed Jim Jordan for Speaker. Okay. Well, everybody's got to make a choice. I just said pick anybody, so why not him? But he picked him, and then as this guy can't get to the number of votes he needs to become Speaker, where's Donald Trump? He's in a courthouse in New York City at a fraud trial trying to defend his money. And then on Friday, he's at a golf tournament at his golf course in Miami. Because why not? Why be there to try to support the guy you say you want to be Speaker? You've been the nominee of this party twice. You want to be nominee a third time. You say you want to provide leadership to the party and the country, and you're off at a golf course or in a courtroom trying to defend your money after you've already been found by the judge to be a fraud. Look, leadership and the character of leadership matters. And we're in this situation in the House of Representatives because a lot of those folks, those 8 that kicked out Kevin McCarthy, those are all Trump candidates. All people that he endorsed and supported. And he's not providing any discipline or any leadership. I can tell you this, if I were President of the United States, 10 at a time, those folks would come to the White House if this situation was going on, and we'd leave with the Speaker. I tell them, I don't care who it is, but I want a commitment from all of you. This is going to be done. Should have been done 2 weeks ago. It should have never been done in the first place. McCarthy shouldn't have been fired. But now, if you're going to fire him, do something. And that's what leadership is about. Instead of him being in Washington and doing that, or being on the phone and doing that, he's off taking care of numero uno. Because in the end, that's all he cares about. And look, we just have to decide what kind of country we want to be. It starts in this country with who our president is. We have a president now who, frankly, isn't up to the job. I mean, I don't disagree with what he's been doing with Israel. I think he's done the right thing. I thought, in the main, the speech he gave the other night was fine. But look at what he does from day to day. And do you believe that that's the image for America? That that's a strong, forward-looking image, putting aside all of the policies for a second, which we'll talk about tonight? It is not. And so here's what we have. We have one guy who's going to spend most of the next 2 years in a courtroom defending himself against fraud charges and criminal charges. We got another guy who's going to be 82 on election day. And listen, everybody, you know, age matters too. And Father Time always wins. None of us beat Father Time. And I will tell you, if I were Joe Biden's son, watching what I'm watching, I would go up to him, put my hand on his shoulder, and say, Dad, congratulations. You did the right thing for the country. You served the country, but it's time to go home. But instead, his son's too busy making money off his father's name, and they're in on the grift. In the very same way that Trump's children are in on the grift, too. No coincidence, everybody, that 6 months after they left the White House, Jared Kushner and his wife Ivanka got $2 billion from the Saudis. $2 billion from the Saudis. No coincidence. They didn't invest in him because he was such a brilliant investor. That was a payback for all the stuff that happened, most of which we probably don't even know about in the White House. Character matters. And so in the end, we're going to talk about a whole ton of issues tonight, and I'm looking forward to doing that. And the way my town hall works is pretty simple. I did 150 of them in my first term as governor of New Jersey. I did over 100 of them when I ran for president the last time, and we've been doing it the same way every time. There are no pre-screened questions. You didn't have to fill out cards that my staff could screen before you got a chance to ask them. You're not going to be limited to only 2 or 3 people answering questions, and I'm going to run out and leave. How you doing, brother? He may get the first question. Because I'm open, but I'm not dumb. And all we're going to do tonight is you raise your hand. I think, do we have microphones around for everybody? Yeah, we do. So you raise your hand. I'll call on you. You ask me whatever question you want. And here's the one guarantee I will give you. You will get an answer. I don't know whether you'll like it or not. We'll find that out. But you're going to get an answer. We don't evade any questions here. Sir, you were the first hand up. She's going to bring, who's going to bring the microphone? She's going to bring the microphone over to you so everybody can hear you. Right there.
Who would be your vice president?
How about instead of giving you a name, because I really... What, you want a name?
Who would be your vice president?
I got to tell you, I think it would be pretty conceited of me to pick a name tonight. But let me tell you, no, I can't, because you know what? Then I'm going to announce a name to somebody who doesn't even know I'm going to announce his or her name tonight. And see all those cameras back there? They're going to be all over the news. Let me tell you the title. I know. Let me tell you the title. I'm not avoiding the question. I think it's, look, I'm not avoiding the question. I think it'd be, I'm looking forward to being on Channel 5 tomorrow. Look, it would be unfair of me to do it. Let me tell you the type of person I'll pick, and you might be able to figure out who the person might be from that, okay? First and foremost, it's a near answer. I'm giving you a near answer. It's a near answer, but here's the problem. If I give you the real answer, then that person's going to get bombarded tomorrow with questions about whether they would accept, whether they want to be. Not fair to them if I haven't called them first and said, you're my first choice, which I haven't done. So let me give you the type of person. The type of person will be, first and foremost, someone who I think could be president if I were to hit the bricks. Secondly, it would have to be someone who's had actual governing experience. All right? Not somebody who's, to be fair to the people in Congress, I don't want a member of Congress. Okay? Because they haven't governed anything. I want somebody who's... That'd be fine, because they'd have real governing experience. If you were a congressman and a governor, yes. And third, I want somebody I like. Because if I don't pick someone I like, I guarantee what's going to happen. Who do you like? You know, let me tell you something. In like another 30 seconds, I'm picking you. Because you look tough, you look like you may have run a couple of things, And I'm getting to like you more and more as you keep coming back at me. So I think I might pick you. But the reason I have to pick someone I like is I know that if I don't like the person, if I pick them just for political reasons, I'm not going to ask their opinion. I'm not going to include them in what's going on. They're going to be isolated away. I want someone who I want next to me, who I will listen to, and whose advice that I care about and want to count on. Because here we go. By the way, this is our show tonight. All of you just watched. Well, you're right, because the person, what he said was, it's not just a 4-year selection or an 8-year selection. It's a selection that goes much further down the road, and he's absolutely right. That who you put in that position and who you set up as a potential successor to you matters to the country and should matter to the country. And I think that's why a lot of people, even on the Democratic side, are really concerned about Joe Biden's successor. Because a lot of them look at the vice president and say, no, thank you. And so, you know, you got to pick somebody who meets those criteria. And you did. You got about as close as anybody could get me to come to actually give it a name. So congratulations, but no names tonight. No names tonight. All right. Yes, sir, right over there.
So 2 quick questions. One, do you want a beer since we're a brewery and you've been on my tab? And secondly, you talked about not raising your hand at the debate. So do I applaud you for your conviction, or do I denigrate you for signing that pledge that says you'll support the Republican nominee just to be on the debate stage?
Well, I think it was really important for me to be on the debate stage, because if I wasn't, nobody else would be taking Trump on. So I think it's really important to do that. And what I said when I signed the pledge was, I'll take it every bit as seriously as Donald Trump took it 8 years ago when he signed the pledge. All right? So, no, I don't want the beer yet. But 3 or 4 more questions, I may point to you and go, let's go. But, you know, look, I signed the pledge to make sure I was on the stage. But I don't think any of you who've watched any of the debates or watched anything I've done have any doubt about how I feel about Donald Trump and his fitness for the presidency, and to be very clear to know that I would not support him if he were the party's nominee, because he doesn't belong within 5 miles of the White House, let alone behind the desk in the Oval Office. Yes, sir, right there. Hold on, let him get the microphone, because everybody can hear you then.
So, Governor, does that mean you'd run as a third party?
No, I would not run as a third party.
Why not?
Let me tell you why. First of all, because I'm running because I want to be president of the United States, not to stop anybody else, but because I want to be president. And I don't see any path for a third-party candidate to win 270 electoral votes and be president of the United States. And I don't think that the presidency and the campaign for the presidency should be used to be a spoiler. I think you got to know you have a chance to win and do everything you can to try to win. And so that's why I wouldn't run as a third-party candidate. I'm a Republican. I'm proud to be a Republican. I want to change where our party is headed right now to a place where we can once again accomplish things and do things, because I still believe that the Republican Party and our philosophies offer the best chance for America to be bigger, stronger, richer, and safer than we are right now. So that's why I would do it that way.
But most Americans want someone not on the right, not on the left, kind of in the middle, with practical things, ideas that you
Right.
bring.
Well, look, and
You stand a good chance of winning, so it's not you be a spoiler, you be a winner, so why not?
because you and I have a disagreement about whether somebody who is an independent in this country could get 270 electoral votes. I want to remind you, the last time we had a serious third-party candidate was 1992 with Ross Perot. He spent a ton of his own money. You might remember, he did 30-minute TV commercials. I don't know if you remember that, but he did 30-minute TV commercials. He worked as hard as anybody as a third-party candidate ever has. He didn't win one state. He got 19% of the vote nationwide. He did better than any third-party candidate except Teddy Roosevelt has ever done. The only time any third-party candidates won any states was when George Wallace won states in 1968, and he ran based on being a segregationist, and he won a few states. But other than that, no one's done it. So I don't want to run just to run. I want to run to win and having been in this business a little while, it's my evaluation that a third-party person can't win. I might turn out to be wrong, but it's what I believe in my heart, and that's what I have to do. Thanks for the question. Yes, sir, right there.
How are you going to handle? Excuse me. How are you going to handle the $31 trillion
Debt
that we have right now, and $1 million or $1 trillion interest expense that the country is faced with?
Yep. First of all, I usually don't like to correct questioners, but it's now a $33 trillion debt. Just keep up. It keeps getting bigger, and the deficit for this year is now going to be $1.7 trillion for this year, double what it was a year ago. Look, the first thing we have to do is stop spending so much. Now, that's an easy thing to say, but let me tell you about what my experience was like in New Jersey and why I would bring the same experience to the White House. When I became governor of New Jersey in 2010, we had an $11 billion deficit on a $29 billion budget. So our deficit was more than a third of our overall budget. And all the Democrats, after I got elected, thought that I was going to have to raise taxes to fill that gap. Instead, what we did was go to something called zero-based budgeting. And that means very simple. Every department comes in and they start at zero, not where they started the year before. And they have to justify to me every program in their budget. It took us a while, but we eliminated in that first year 683 programs and balanced the budget without raising taxes, balanced the budget every year that I was governor, and left them with $1 billion surplus at the end of the 8 years. And in a blue state, and by the way, I would argue the bluest state in the country, because we haven't had a Republican elected to the United States Senate in 51 years. 1972, we have the longest streak of any state in the country. And in a blue state, after doing that for those first 4 years, I got reelected with 61% of the vote in a very blue state. Now, I will tell you though, when I first made all those cuts, my approval rating went from 55% to 38%, because every one of those programs has a constituency. Every program, somebody liked it enough to get it in the budget. The same thing's going to happen to me if I'm president. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to eliminate lots of programs, and it may be some that someone in this audience likes. But in the end, we cannot continue to run these deficits. We continue to run these deficits, we are going to go under as a country. And, you know, $1 trillion, people may miss that at the end, and you're dead on right. Our interest payments next year, starting November 1st, will be $1 trillion a year in interest on the debt. $1 trillion a year. Before we do anything else, before we spend another nickel on anything, we're paying our bondholders $1 trillion a year. It's got to end at some point, everybody. And there's going to be moments when I do this that I'm going to be unpopular for doing it. But I don't care. You've got to do it. Because in the last two presidents, just so you understand what's happened here, Donald Trump added $7.8 trillion to the national debt after telling us he would balance the budget in 4 years. Added $7.8 trillion, the most any president has added. But Joe Biden, he's the jealous type. He's jealous. He's going to be at $5.9 trillion by October 31st, and he's going to be gunning for the record in his last year as president. Think about it. These two guys have added $13.7 trillion to the $33 trillion debt. So two presidents in the last 7 years have added more than a third of the total debt we've had in this country in our history. Think about that. It is completely irresponsible for both of them. And both parties deserve blame, because Trump had a Republican Congress, and they did it with him. And now Biden's got a Democratic Congress his first 2 years and split now, and they're all keep adding to the tab. You need a president who knows how to say no. And believe me, if there's anything you'll learn about me, I'm not afraid to say no, and I'm not afraid to take hits. Because if you're a Republican in New Jersey, all you're doing is saying no and taking hits. So We feel good about it. It's an important question and an important issue because our grandchildren won't even be able to pay back all this debt. Be back to our great-grandchildren. All right. Yes, ma'am, in the back, right there by the tent.
Thank you, Governor Christie.
Thank you.
Welcome to Charleston.
Happy to be back.
We're happy to have you. So, my question is around immigration and how we approach it. I don't think there's a simple answer. There's no silver bullet. It's a multi-administration, bipartisan solution. Compassionate, certainly. We have laws on the books, asylum, those sorts of things. But it's clearly a political hot button that seems to occur. Like everyone talks about it during campaigns, and then there's no solution when it actually comes. So where do you start? I know your faith is important to you. I know a lot of the people we have immigrating into this country are Catholic. I'm a Catholic as well. So how do we appreciate what people are looking to do, build a new life here while protecting our country's national interests?
Well, look, you're right. It's a really complicated issue, and other folks in this campaign try to make it really simple. Now, Governor DeSantis says he's going to shoot people stone cold dead at the border, and he's going to send the U.S. Army into Mexico. Let me guarantee you two things. One, he's not going to shoot people stone cold dead at the border. And two, the promise to send the American military into Mexico will be fulfilled as soon as the wall that we got promised 8 years ago across the entire border gets built. And we got 52 miles of wall in 4 years. I tell you this, and he told us the Mexicans were going to pay for it, right? I think the Mexicans may have paid for it if they knew he was only going to build 52 miles, right? So, first thing is, you're right, it's complicated. Let me explain how complicated it is. In the last 11 months, our Customs and Border Patrol officers have averaged 200,000 encounters a month of people trying to get over the border. 200,000 a month. Do you know how many detention beds we have at the border? 38,000. Now look, I went to law school because I couldn't do math or science, but even I could figure that out. 200,000 encounters a month, 38,000 beds. It is not about sending the army into Mexico. It is not about shooting people dead when they try to come over the border. It's a combination of a bunch of things. So let me tell you the 5 things I would do. Number one is on first day, I would sign an executive order sending National Guard to the border to help Customs and Border Patrol. Let them deal with the illegal immigrants trying to come in. Let the National Guard deal with the drug dealers. That's number one. Because remember, we had 110,000 Americans die of an overdose last year. It's now the number one killer among young men 18 to 34 years old. We've got to deal with that problem. Secondly, I would add 10,000 Customs and Border Patrol officers inside the first year. They are overwhelmed by the number of people who are coming over. They need help, and we need to add to it. Third, how about this? Let's say we capture somebody who's trying to come in illegally, and we're going to have an asylum hearing, right? Because they're entitled to an asylum hearing if they're claiming that they're escaping political persecution. You know how long it takes to get an asylum hearing now? 4 years. 4 years. So what do? Right, we release. Hold on a sec. Hold on now. I want you to get the 70,000 donors and get on the debate stage, then you and I can have some fun. We'll be good. Look, you're going to wind up waiting 4 years. What happens is these folks get released, and then we tell them to come back to El Paso in 4 years. Not happening. They're never coming back. We need to triple the number of immigration judges to be able to get that number, that asylum hearing number, down to below a year so that you can detain people appropriately. Fourth, on detention, double the number of detention beds. Let's get real. If we're getting 200,000 encounters, we can't have 38,000 beds. Otherwise, we're just going to be releasing people into the country and letting them stay here, and they're not coming back for their hearing. And we got that problem. Last, we need to get an immigration laws and systems here, and the president's got to be willing to put his credibility on the line for it. We need to have a merit-based system to come in and legally immigrate to this country. We have 6 million open jobs in this country right now. And if in this economy we have 6 million open jobs, that means those are jobs that Americans either can't do or won't do. We want to grow our economy and continue to grow at a much faster pace than we're doing now, which will also help the debt, is we got to get people to come in and do those jobs, but we shouldn't just be letting people indiscriminately in. What are your skills? And what are our needs? And bring them in based upon skills and needs, right? Because here's the thing. Here's the thing. What we've got to do is look at how we grow our economy, how we protect our border together. And in the end, we're going to have to trade with the Democrats on some things. Because otherwise it's not going to pass. You need 60 votes to pass anything in the United States Senate. And so we're going to need to stop digging our heels in and saying, no compromise under any circumstances. Sounds really good when you send that an email to somebody to get them to contribute to you. But in practicality, what are we seeing now? We're seeing ourselves being invaded. And ultimately, this is a national security issue. Because we don't know who's coming over that border. But I'll tell you this, if I wanted to do harm to this country and I wanted to try to get in, I wouldn't try to get in through Charleston Airport. I try to get in over the southern border. It'd be a lot easier, it seems to me, to do that than to get past security at any airport in this country. So it's a national security issue too. But it's complicated, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take a president who's willing to say, I'm willing to give something that Democrats want in return for us getting, fact-based and merit-based immigration, E-Verify. So when you want to hire someone, you got to verify that they're here legally. Democrats don't want to give that. All right, for us to get it, we're going to have to give them some stuff we don't like either. But we can't look around anymore and think this problem's going to solve itself, because it's not. And we're going to get worse and worse in this country. And it's going to threaten our national security and threaten our ability to be able to deal with the budget problems we have. Because look at what's happening. And last thing I'll say on immigration is this. How about all of those mayors and governors who said they wanted to be sanctuary cities and sanctuary states? When people weren't coming in, that was a great idea for them, right? They thought it was great. They could sound so compassionate and caring. Now, Massachusetts, New York, California, Illinois, New Jersey, all these places that said they were sanctuary cities and states, now they're saying, help us, help us. We can't afford to pay for all this. Well, my view is you should have thought of that before you opened your mouth and said, everybody who's coming in here illegally, come to our state or our city. That's wrong, and we've got to stop that as well. Because sending those open invitations, people listen to what American leaders say, and they take our word for it. And now they're coming. And we have no way to pay for it, nor should we have to put up with it from a national security perspective. So that's the way I would deal with it. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I want to say two things first that aren't questions. Thank you for running again. I think a lot of us here are glad that you did.
Thank you.
And thank you for being willing to say no, even if it means some people aren't going to like you for a minute, because that's hard, and there aren't that many people willing to do it, much less admit to the fact that they're going to do it. So at least when we vote, we go in knowingly. I have to humanize my question with a picture, and if I get upset, those are my two little boys. They're the loves of my life. They're 5 and 7. And I know I'm not the only parent, I'd say in this room, but we're lucky enough to be in the South where we can be outside. Independent of all the politics and the left and the right and the money behind the NRA, the worst part of my day is leaving them at school when I drive away. What can you do? What's the thought? What's the plan? Because we can't make everybody happy, and it might take more than 4 years to do it, but how are they going to be safe? How are they going to be safe every day when I drive away from them?
Yeah. Look, you're right. There's, I'm sure, a lot of parents and grandparents here who share the same concern, right? And when you see these things happen, especially in schools, but it's not restricted to schools, but when you see these things happen, you think to yourself, how can we do better for them? And like the immigration answer, there's not an easy answer to this, right? Because we have a couple of things at conflict with each other. Right? We've got our desire to try to make sure that we give our children a safe and and happy place for them to learn. And we also have a Second Amendment which says that people have a right to bear arms, and the courts have interpreted that pretty clearly. Right? So now we believe in law and order, we believe in the Constitution and our process, even though we know it's not perfect. It's the best imperfect system out there. So we have those things of conflict. So how do we try to work our way through it? I think the first thing is that it shouldn't be easier to get into a school than it is to get into an office building, right? And you think about it. You go to most schools, even now, it's still much easier to get in there than it is to get into any place else. We have to provide greater security at schools. Well, no, look, that's part of the rest of the answer, so let's hang in there. We need to make security at our schools better. And we need to acknowledge the world we live in now, right? So I think all of us would love to not have to have security officers at school. When I was young, which was a long time ago, a lot longer than you, we didn't have to worry about that, but we have to worry about it now. So we need to invest in both the technology and in the physical presence of security at our schools. And look, we spend $400 billion a year in this country on K-12 education between state, local, and federal money. So we need to figure out how we can make sure that we pay for that, because that's, I think, the first and most important thing. And I think that presence, once it becomes normalized, will make people feel safer and more secure. Second, if you look at most of these school shootings, they wind up being with people who are deeply disturbed. And it goes to a bigger issue in our country about the way we deal with mental health disease as opposed to every other disease. Every other disease in this country, we say we want people to go to the best doctors, get the treatment they can get as quickly as possible in a place where they feel like they can be cared for. And whether it's cancer or diabetes or heart disease or any of those, we don't also put any value judgment on it, even though with those diseases, most of them include some human conduct which has contributed to either creating them or making them worse. But we don't judge people on it. We say, you're sick, you have heart disease, we want you to get help, etc. We don't do that on mental health disease. We don't talk about it. If it happens inside our family, we don't talk about it. And we don't let people know that if they're having trouble, they need to go get help. And we need to make the help more broadly available. We don't have enough people who are providing treatment in this country for mental health problems. But, you know, in a country where we spend as more than any other country on health care, it's about reapportioning that. And it's about getting rid of a lot of the middlemen that we have in this healthcare system who are all making money not by providing care, but by pushing paper. You can. And we did it in New Jersey, for instance, on pharmacy benefits. And it's a little bit off your answer, but since we got there, on pharmacy benefits, you know, these PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers, get in between the insurance company and the pharmacy to manage something. I don't know. I've been in government for a long time. I don't know what the hell they're managing. But let me tell you, what we did was we said, you want to continue to do the job, you have to participate in a reverse auction. Instead of bidding up, tell me how much lower you're willing to go to get my business. And we were the first state in the country to do it. In the first year, in just New Jersey, with just our public employee health system, we saved $500 million. In the first year, in one state, by telling them we're not going to pay you unlimited amounts. And the way they get paid, the pharmaceutical companies give discounts, some up to 60 to 70% that are supposed to go to you. Instead, the pharmacy benefit managers come in, they take 2/3 of them themselves, and then only the little bit gets passed on to you. By cutting that money out, those are the kind of things we can do. And I don't think they have much of a constituency except for their shareholders. So I think it's something we could do. So we have to make mental health more broadly available. Third, I don't have any problem at all with making sure that background checks for people who are buying guns are broadly done in this country. Well, okay, so How do I feel about high capacity? Look, here's my problem with taking one class of weapons and singling them out. Is first off, in any of the last 10 years, the murders committed by high capacity guns versus handguns is 3% to 97%. 3% on high capacity guns, 97% on handguns. So here's my worry. If I go ahead and say, fine, I'd be happy with banning high capacity guns, the next thing is going to come and say, well, what the hell did that do? It only eliminated 3% of the problem. Now we want you to eliminate handguns, which I'm not going to do. So I don't want to go down the slippery slope of doing that and infringing upon the constitutional rights that people have to protect themselves. And so we need to get at the root of the problem, which is a lack of security in our schools, a lack of mental health treatment available to people who do that stuff. This Republican, she asked, because you couldn't hear her because the microphone's gone, will Republicans get behind providing more mental health care if they're not going to be willing to ban certain classes of guns? This Republican will. I did in New Jersey, and I'll do the same thing in the country. We need to make our country healthier from a mental health perspective because it affects homelessness, it affects drug abuse, and all those other things. So you're not just solving for one problem. By making mental health treatment more broadly available, you're going to help solve for a lot of problems in this country, and that's the way we would do it. Well, that's right. It's got to, and that's why. Remember what my answer was. It's about reapportioning the money within the system, not about spending more. Yes, sir, right there. I'll get you.
Hi. Earlier this year, I think you know that Donald J. Trump was found in a court of law to be proven to have sexually abused a woman. And yet, I hear very little about that on the debate stage. I hear very little about that and from reporters' questions. I'm wondering if you can address that and why people aren't talking about it.
Well, first thing is, his legal problems are like, a Sunday brunch buffet. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. And the fact is that, yes, he was found not just sexually abused, sexually assault a woman in a store in the dressing room in New York City. And look, whether it's that, whether it's, well, yeah, okay, so look, it's one of the many reasons I believe he's unfit to be president of the United States. Right? So, and I don't know what else to say about that. Like, look, it is wrong for anyone to sexually assault someone else. So in case there's any doubt about that, in terms of the way I feel, sexual assault, no go. All right? That's it. Whether you're president of the United States or whether you're a bartender here, should not be permitted, must be punished, and has to be spoken about. But remember something. In addition to that, this is a guy who stole classified documents from the White House on his way out the door, and when he was asked for them privately, quietly, politely by the government for 18 months, he said no, lied about it, kept the documents, showed them to people who didn't have clearance. That's directly related to his job. And didn't happen 20 years ago, happened just 5 years ago. On January 6th, he lied about the results of the election repeatedly from election night forward. He tried to get the election overturned. Then on January 6th, he stands there and tells people, go up to the Capitol and stop this, and I'll march with you. Now, I've known Donald Trump for 22 years. If there's a risk of him breaking a fingernail, he's not putting himself at risk. So I knew he was never marching up to the Capitol with those folks. Gets them to go, and then sits in the White House for hours and watches what's going on Capitol Hill and does nothing. Does nothing. In Atlanta now, we have his own lawyer who pled guilty yesterday, and what he said in court was that he conspired with Donald Trump to illegally attempt to overturn the election, and he's now going to testify against him, his own lawyer. My question to the members of my own party is, what more do you need to see to judge his character? Put aside guilt or innocence. There will be a trial, and a jury of his peers should decide that like they should for anybody else in this country. He doesn't deserve any more rights, but he doesn't deserve any less either. Let him have a trial, let him present his defense, and let the jury make the decision. But I don't think we need a jury to decide whether that's the type of character you want sitting behind the desk in the Oval Office and representing our country. On that, he's guilty. He's guilty of that. And, you know, all of us who voted for him, and I voted for him, all of us took a chance. I mean, let's face it. It was one of the worst choices in an election I've ever seen in my life, all right? Between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, I was like, good Lord, what is this? But we all took a chance. Many of us who voted for Trump took a chance saying, you know what? We know who she is. We don't know him all that well. He's been successful in some way. Let's see if he can do this. We took a risk. We were wrong. Not about not picking it. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. I can't argue with you all night, okay? Let me finish before you yell you're wrong, because that's part of what's wrong with this country right now. Let's let each other finish our sentences. It's not that we should have picked her. It's that we should have had better choices. And that's why I'm running. Because I don't want the choice to be another bad choice this next November and have two guys who are combined 160 years old as the best America can do in a country of 330 million people. I think we can do a hell of a lot better than that, and that's why I'm willing to fight him every inch of the way to get the nomination and then to beat Joe Biden. In the back.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for coming out.
My pleasure.
I'm a millennial, as opposed to many of the people in this crowd. No offense.
None taken.
But many of your children are probably my age. What can you do to reach out to the youth vote? I guess I'm 35. I couldn't really claim that. And a lot of our concern is with income inequality and corporations taking more than they're probably worth in this country. So how can you bring them back in the reins and reach out to the youth vote amidst a crowd that is getting older?
Well, first off, my philosophy as a political candidate and as a public servant over my entire career has been not to just appeal to one demographic, but try to say things that make the country as a whole better. Because if you make the country as a whole better, millennials are going to benefit from it. Folks in middle age are going to benefit from it. Older folks are going to benefit. Because if you start sectioning our country and dividing it, that's where we are now. We've been dividing our country into smaller and smaller and smaller parts and pitting those parts against each other. So I'm not going to sit here and make a promise. Here's the millennial promise. Here's the promise for you guys in your 50s. 70s, here's what you get. By the way, you guys in your 20s, here's what you get. I'm not going to do that. But what I'll say to you about income inequality, because I think it's an important topic, is this. Let's look at what's going on right now with the auto workers and the strike that's going on there. Here's what I believe should be the principles. Folks who work like the United Auto Workers do, who bring experience and expertise and hard work to their job every day, need to be paid more than what they're getting paid right now for two reasons. One, because their work deserves and earns that respect. And secondly, let's not forget, it was all of us, the taxpayers of this country, who bailed the auto companies out, right, during COVID. They're only existing because we, with our tax money, bailed them out. Well, now that they're starting to be profitable again, and they are, and that's a good thing, they've got to share more of that profit with the people who are actually building the cars and doing the work that needs to be done. Here's what I'm not for. The union says they want to get paid for a 40-hour week for working 32 hours. Here's my principle. I'll pay you well for every hour you work, but I'm not going to pay you a nickel for when you don't work. And part of my problem with the generation of folks that have now come through COVID is that there's been kind of this idea that you don't have to go to work anymore, right? That like, I'd rather work at home. Me too, right? I'd rather work at home. Now, if I get to be president, I do get to work at home, so that's great. But for the rest of my career, I had to go and work. And I've never gotten paid for work that I didn't do. I've never gotten paid for not showing up. All right? You get paid for what you work. And I'm fine for them getting much more money than they get now for the hours that they work, but not for hours that they don't work. And that's the conflict that's going on right now. And what I would say as president would be to the auto companies, pay them beyond what you're paying them now because they've earned it, deserved it, and they bring the experience you need to turn out a great product. But to the workers, I'd say, don't ask to get paid for not doing something. Get asked to be paid more for what you do very well and work really hard at. And I think if we have that kind of principle in this country, everybody will do well and income inequality will shrink.
Governor, you picked some fights in New Jersey, and you won a couple of them.
Yep.
Who's worth picking a fight with at the federal government, for the United States, for us, and how are you going to win it?
Well, I think there's a few fights that come to mind right away worth picking. The first one we already talked about in response to this gentleman's question, which is you have to pick a fight with the federal bureaucracy who thinks that they're supposed to get more and more money every year rather than actually deliver results and get paid just what you need to deliver those results, not more, all right? That's fight number one to pick. Fight number two to pick is with the education establishment in this country, all right? And I picked that fight in New Jersey with the teachers' unions there. And here's the thing. This is not about teachers. This is about their union. And they're two very separate and different things. In New Jersey, the head of the teachers' union remains a teacher, continues to accumulate, doesn't work in a classroom, and gets paid over $1 million a year. Yes, over $1 million a year for the head of the teachers union for representing the teachers. And it's mandatory dues. Every teacher and school employee pays $750 a year in dues. There's 200,000 school employees in New Jersey. Do the math. Over $140 million a year gets collected, and they don't pay a nickel towards teacher salary, teacher health care, or teacher pensions. And that's why the teachers union in this country is dominating an educational system that is underperforming. 39% of our 8th graders in this country do not read at grade level. 25% of our 8th graders don't do math at grade level. That's not only going to mean a horrible economic future for our country if they can't read and they can't do math, but it's also going to mean a horrible thing for our democracy. So the fight that needs to be taken on is to say, I want to put parents back in control of their children's education. Nobody cares about their children, loves their children more, understands their children more than parents. And these decisions are being made outside of parents right now, and we need to fix that. And on the higher education level, you should not have to go into a lifetime of debt to get a college education. But the problem, to solve the problem, is not to say you can walk away from your debt. You know, for those of us who did borrow money, like I did to go to college, and my wife did to go to college, it took us 10 years to pay our loans back. And there are probably a lot of other people in this audience tonight who did the same thing. My rule would be really simple. No college can raise tuition and fees above the rate of inflation. If they do, then they get no federal money for anything else. Imagine how quickly that would turn, how quickly tuition's going up. And the last thing, when you watch what's going on college campuses regarding what just happened in Israel and the encouragement of anti-Semitism by some of these liberal colleges and universities and their leadership, we can't stand for that any longer. We got to speak out against it, and I would take that fight on too. Yes, sir, right there.
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming down. I kind of want to piggyback on the young gentleman there. It is the grand old party, but we do need to make it a little younger. And I understand you can't make promises to any demographic, and I don't think he was asking for promises, but we have to do something. This gentleman here got more airtime for yelling and screaming at you than this gentleman over here when he asked you what are you going to do to bring in a younger demographic. Our governor is a demographic that I try my best to have my daughters listen. But they hear Republican, they're done. But it's because, I mean, we see it tonight. I watched, I got here early and I observed the media talk to older white men. The first 3 questions it went to older white men. There's more votes out there than us older white men. And what are we going to do to get those votes?
Well, look, first off, what you have to do as someone who's running for office is to speak to everybody and go to places where you might be uncomfortable, right? So, I made a history of doing that. That's why when I ran for governor, I got 51% of the Latino vote, why I got 28% of the African-American vote, and 71% of independents. And then when I ran for re-election against a female candidate, I won 58% of the female vote. The fact is that, all the younger demographic is all included in those. There are young Latinos, there are young African Americans, and there are young women, and they're all included in that group. The point is that I think that what young people want to hear is no different than what older people want to hear. They want to hear the truth. And they're tired of being lied to. And they're tired of getting promises that people don't even try to keep, let alone keep. And we've dealt with that now in the last 2 sets of elections. And even going back to Barack Obama when he said, if you like your doctor, you can keep him. If you like your health care plan, you can keep it. That was the first of the big lies of the last 15 or 20 years. And we need to make sure that whether it's that or whether it's Donald Trump talking about building a wall or balancing the budget, or whether it's Joe Biden saying he's going to bring the whole country together and not go far to the left and then runs far to the left. People look at that stuff and they say, I can't trust anything anybody says to me anymore. One of the things that when I did all the budget cutting that I talked about in terms of that gentleman's question, I had press ask me afterwards, like, when the numbers went down and I was down into the 30s, they said, you must not care about being reelected. And I said, I really don't care about being reelected. And the joke I made about it was, I don't care because I already get the portrait. Right? Like, you get elected governor once, they are going to paint a portrait of you. And it's going to hang in the State House forever. And then all you're arguing over is the little brass plaque underneath, and whether it says 4 years or 8 years. Like, I'm not going to sell my soul for a little brass plaque. What I want to be is a president of consequence that does consequential things. And even if I only do consequential things for 4 years, I will have made this better than the way I found it. And that's what we need to do. And everybody's too worried about, that's what you see with these jokers in Congress right now. They're all much too worried, in my view, about, I love when the bus shows up. Because those guys are here for thoughtful conversation. What matters the most in the end is not keeping a title. I got plenty of titles. I could retire on the titles now. I've been U.S. attorney and I've been governor. I have husband, father, son, grandson. I got more titles than I know what to do with. President would be a good one. And we're willing to add it, but not to sell your soul to keep it. And these guys on Capitol Hill and women are selling their soul to keep a title, not to do the work for you. And I think that's what we have to start talking about and acting differently. Young lady in the back.
So I'm not able to vote yet, but I am still curious about your views on the policies surrounding women's reproductive rights and what has been happening recently in the courts surrounding that issue.
Yep. Look, I make no mystery about how I feel about this issue personally. I'm Catholic, I'm pro-life, and I feel very strongly about that as a personal point of character. Now, on the bigger issue, for years as a lawyer, I've been arguing that there's no constitutional right to an abortion in the Constitution, and that we shouldn't be making up things in the Constitution. So now the Supreme Court says, you're right, it's not inside the Constitution, every state should decide. Now, our party that's been arguing about that for 50 years now wants a federal ban on abortion. Well, wait a second. I thought we weren't in favor of the federal government getting involved in this issue. My answer is very simple. Every state should make their own decision, because that's where people have the greatest ability to have an impact, either by voting in a referendum or who they elect to their state legislature, and let each state decide. And that means there's going to be a lot of difference across the country. In Oklahoma, the law says no abortion unless the life of the mother is at risk. I wouldn't agree with that, personally. On the other hand, because I believe in more exceptions for rape and incest than others, but on the other hand, in my home state of New Jersey, you can have an abortion up to the 9th month. I don't agree with that either. But there's going to be differences all across the country. That's the way our country works. We should not have a federal government that sets every rule of everything you can and can't do, because believe me, some days you may not like the rules they're going to make, and some days you may like them. Let the states make the decision. So I think every state should be able to make their own decision on that issue, and we should stand by that. That's the way I would do it. Yes, ma'am, right there.
This goes way back to the 60s when my husband and I were high school sweethearts. We've been married 55 years. Thank you. And hoping uphill. I remember in 3rd grade crawling under our desks. We grew up by Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. B-52s, big SAC base. We got an alarm and we crawled under our desks at any time during the day because Russians were coming to bomb us. Okay, so fast forward to today. We have hundreds, I don't know how many, of young men and women, underground bunkers with their fingers on the switch, waiting for the call from D.C., which is really scary as hell to me when there's somebody in control like Trump. What would you think about when you run for president having a psychological exam, a background check, a tax check, and a mental health exam by somebody that's not involved with you personally?
Okay, so mental health check, psychological check, which sound the same, tax check, and physical exam. Okay, taxes. All right. First off, every year that I've been in public life, I release my tax returns. And Donald Trump's the first person to run for president, be president, who didn't do it. It's wrong not to do it. You should know how I make my money and where I make my money from, because it can help you take a look at, what I might be influenced and not influenced by. Now, look, on a mental health, No, excuse me for a sec. If you've got a question, look, excuse me. Excuse me. If you have a question, raise your hand and I'll call on you. But instead, what you want to do, hold on, excuse me. Excuse me, I'm not dealing with your question now. When you have a question, raise your hand and I'll call on, excuse me, and I'll call on you and answer it. But right now I'm answering her question. And if you don't think that what I'm saying has anything to do with anything, then you can leave too. So let me answer your question. Look, on the mental health and psychological tests, look, I take a pretty simple approach to this. I think we can tell when somebody isn't fit to be president. okay? It's not like you need some doctor to come in and say, he or she doesn't seem right. I think we kind of figured that one out, all right? And we have two guys right now, neither one of them seem right for different reasons, okay? So Trump doesn't seem right because all he cares about is himself. He's a classic narcissist. All he cares about is the person he sees in the mirror when he wakes up in the morning. And if anybody thinks that Donald Trump will put your interest ahead of his, you're kidding yourself, all right? Now, on Joe Biden, he's just too old now. Look, everybody ages at different paces. And some people, my dad's 90 years old. He's doing great. But I wouldn't want him to be president. The pressure of that job, the time constraints of that job is just too much for somebody who has already put 80 or 90 years into the job of living every day and working and raising a family and all the things that my dad did and that Joe Biden did. So I don't think we need those exams. I think we're the examiners. Because guess what? You'll get some doctor who will say, this guy has this problem or that problem. And then they'll say, well, that doctor's biased because he's a Republican and he doesn't like Joe Biden, or vice versa with Trump. How about we take the responsibility? There's nobody here who can't figure it out. We can figure it out. We may want to ignore it, but then that's up to us. We've got a job. But taxes, yes, that should be public. Everyone should know where I make money and how I've made money in my life so that you can help to judge when I make decisions on your behalf, whether I'm making them on your behalf or whether I'm making it to try to benefit myself. And what we've seen for both of the last two presidents is that they've made a lot of decisions to benefit themselves and their families. This is not a third world country. This is not a banana republic. This is not a kingdom where the younger replace the older in the same family. This is a democracy, and the longest serving democracy in the country, in the world rather. And so we need to have those tax returns out there so people know what they're getting. Then you make the judgment. Whether it makes sense to you or not, you make the judgment. But you can't make that judgment if you don't see. Now, look, don't worry about the guys with their fingers on the button. They're pretty good, and they've been tested and all that. But they also, you don't see them publicly. You don't have the opportunity to make an evaluation of them because we don't parade them out on television and out like this. So you need those exams for those guys. You don't need that one for me. You can judge. You think I'm nuts? Don't vote for me.
Physical examination.
Oh, physical examination. You should release your physical exam every year. Every year that I was governor, I released my physical exam. Every year I have one. You should release it so people know what the story is. I'll preview mine a little bit for you. I'm a little overweight. So that you're gonna find out about. Yes, right here.
Why is it that Congress feels that the idea of compromise is a bad idea? That's Congress's job, is
right?
To compromise. So
Look,
why can't we get the Republican Party and the Democratic Party to figure it out and move the country forward instead of being locked in this quagmire?
Look, the first ad I ran for re-election for governor of New Jersey, the title of it was "Compromise is not a dirty word." And look, what's happened here from a technical perspective is that we have gerrymandered so many of these congressional House districts where these folks don't have to worry about an opponent from the other party. They only have to worry about a primary. And so they go far right and far left in order to protect those flanks. We need to stop the gerrymandering in this country. There got to be more competitive House districts. Second, there need to be term limits. Look, as governor, I had a term limit. I had an 8-year term limit. No one is indispensable in government. And these guys, like, look, all these guys have been there for. Nancy Pelosi is running again. I mean, for God's sake, she's been there for 40 years. If you haven't accomplished what you wanted in 40 years, get out. Get out, right? And it's on our side, too. Chuck Grassley, Strom Thurmond, who's from this state, who was there forever, right? I mean, come on. We've all been guilty of it. So term limits is another thing. And third, you need a president who forces compromise. But it's risky. But you got to be willing to take risk as president. You know, I worked with Democrats in New Jersey for 8 years because they control both houses of the legislature. So I had a choice to make. I could either yell and scream and hold my breath, make headlines, or I could put touchdowns in the end zone. The job of a president or a governor is to put touchdowns in the end zone. And each play is not going to be perfect and not going to be exactly the way I designed it, but that's the way the government was designed. Our founders set this up to be a system of checks and balances where no one party or one philosophy dominated, but that they used the system to force change. We've got to get back to that, and you need a president who's willing to do it. I have a track record of having done it, and by the way, no one else on that stage does. Every one of them is from a red state where they never had a compromise. You go to Washington, I don't care who you are, you're going to have to compromise or you're going to be ineffective. How about we elect someone? Remember, the last president that we elected who actually knew how to do that on our side of the aisle was Ronald Reagan, who was a governor in the blue state of California and did 8 years that anybody would accept again right now. Yes, sir, in the back. Waving your hand. Someone's coming with a microphone. There you go.
First of all, thank you, Governor, for being here.
My pleasure.
My question has to do with the financing, the funding of Social Security and Medicare. What can you tell us?
First thing I can tell you is that if we do nothing, in 11 years, you will get a 24% cut in Social Security benefits and a 25% cut in Medicare funding. So that's why when Joe Biden stood in front of the country in his State of the Union address in January and said, can we all agree we'll do nothing to Social Security? And both sides stood up and cheered, a room full of liars and hypocrites. Because they all know that if we do nothing to Social Security, in 11 years, we will have to see a 24% cut. And so for either people in this audience who rely on Social Security or folks who someday want to rely on Social Security, the idea of a 24% cut is just not tenable. People will not survive. And the whole idea of Social Security was to make sure that people did not grow old poor and unable to support themselves, have a place to live and food to eat. So there's three elements of Social Security, and we got to deal with them. Only three. Retirement age, eligibility, and taxes. That's it. It's a math equation. It's not, unlike some of these other problems that are really complicated, like immigration, this one's pretty simple. So let's start with retirement age. We have to increase retirement age for people who are right now in their 30s and 40s. We're not going to increase it for people in their 50s, 60s. That would be unfair. They haven't had time to plan to deal with working for more years. But Mary Pat and I have, our oldest is 30 years old, our son Andrew. If we raise his retirement age a few years, if he can't figure out how to deal with that between now and when he gets to his late 60s, early 70s, we got bigger problems with Andrew than that, right? So we need to raise retirement age. We need to look at eligibility. Fact is, this country is a great, great capitalist country. And because of it, lots of people have done very well, made a lot of money. At what point does the amount of money you have become so much that you really don't need to take Social Security? Now look, the first thing I hear from some people is, I paid into it, I want my money out. Okay, but you pay for lots of things that you don't get a direct benefit for. For instance, I've been fortunate to never be on food stamps. But how about the fact that I pay for food stamps? And you do through your taxes. We pay for certain things because it creates a greater good for the country. Because we don't want people going to bed hungry. So we decide to pay for food stamp program, right? So how about we look at Social Security the same way for the very wealthy? And I mean, like, Warren Buffett, does he need Social Security? Like, I don't think so. When Mark Zuckerberg gets to that age, does he really need Social Security? I think he'll be able to get by. And so the big problem there is going to be deciding what's the number. And that's going to be a negotiation. But we need to deal with that. Because if we don't deal with those things, it's going to go broke. And it's the same thing with Medicare. Eligibility age and making sure that those who need it are the ones who get it, not just the fact that I paid for it, therefore I want it. And this should be a need-based thing, not a want-based thing. And I think that's the way to deal with it. And you know, everybody who stands up and says, we won't touch Social Security. I remember when I was running 8 years ago, I proposed a similar kind of plan. And Trump came up to me on the debate stage. And one of the debates, he said, hey, those ideas on Social Security are really good. And I said, thanks, Donald. And he said, I mean, I'm never going to be for them because it'll get people angry. But they're really good ideas. We got to start being willing to tell people the truth, because lying to them just leads to us going broke in every different way. So that's the way I would deal with it. All right. I'm being told that we're going to blind each other with the lights. If I only take 2 more questions, then we can get everybody to go back and enjoy the rest of your Saturday night. Sir, right there.
Back on foreign policy, I appreciate what you said and agree on. The world's a better place if the U.S. is leading it. I'm interested in your view, because my belief is that some politicians may be too pro-interventionist, and so what's the cost? When I look at the cost financially of Ukraine plus Israel, and if we have to put Taiwan on, and then equally important to me, the human cost, are we going to get drug into putting troops on the ground or opening us to terrorist attacks? So what's your view on how we can balance making sure that the U.S. is leading, but at the same time being fiscally responsible and not causing us great risk?
Well, they're really good questions. So let's deal with each of them one at a time. So the question of troops on the ground, the most important decision the president has to make, and I don't think in any of the circumstances we're confronting right now, either Ukraine or Israel, that American troops should be on the ground. I don't think it needs to happen, and I don't think we should have it happen. Now, I'll say this with Israel. If there came a point where a number of the Middle Eastern countries wanted to wipe Israel off the map and eliminate its existence, then we'd have to consider doing what we need to do. But I think the Israeli Defense Forces are amongst the most well-funded, well-trained in the world, and I think they'll be able to handle what they need to handle. The much more difficult question in Israel is going to be when to stop for them. Because what we want to do is preserve a situation which was developing where you could have peace with a number of the Arab countries and isolate Iran. Saudi Arabia and the Israelis were very close to an agreement. And I think that's why one of the reasons Iran got Hamas to do it was to blow that up. So we need to continue to encourage the Israelis to let them know we support them, we're going to help them win their fight, but they also have to make sure they understand that there's going to come a moment where we have to make sure that peace in the future is possible. On Ukraine, I would say this to you. I went to Ukraine 2 months ago to see it for myself on the ground and to meet with President Zelensky. The first 2 things he said, we met for an hour together. The first thing he said to me is, every time you talk about this issue, please do me a favor. Tell any American that you see that we say thank you. Because without you, we would be eliminated at this point. And so there is great gratitude over there for what we're doing. Secondly, he said, we will never accept American troops in this war. And he said, that's a point of national pride for us. We believe we can win this war on our own. We've been occupied by Russia before. We didn't like it. And to all due respect, we don't want to be occupied by you either. We want to do this on our own. If you give us the weapons to do it, we will be able to beat Russia. And when you look at the fact that with 5% of our annual military budget, which is what we've invested so far in Ukraine, 1 year's military budget, 5%, they have recaptured 50% of the land that Russia took when it initially came in. It seems like a good investment to me. And lastly, remember, the last time we turned our back on a shooting war in Europe, it saved us for about 4 or 5 years, and then we had to lose 500,000 Americans in World War II and countless tens of billions of dollars. So some of these questions are, do you invest something now to avoid the problems you're talking about? And that's a hard call. But that's the call you hire presidents to make. And I'm telling you that my view always will be American troops as a last resort anywhere. But Don't let the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians and the North Koreans be the ones who are influencing what goes on all over the world. Taiwan, lastly, that's why I say we should start sending them arms now. Let the Chinese know they're going to be ready if they come. And remember this, if you don't care about it from a human rights perspective, think about it this way. 2/3 of the world's semiconductors are manufactured in Taiwan. Everything we do now has semiconductors in them. Our phones, our thermostats in our house, our cars, everything has semiconductors. Who do you want deciding who gets them? Us or the Communist Chinese Party? Seems to me that we have a number of incentives to try to buttress up Taiwan and help them. And all of our friends in Asia, the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Taiwanese, along with the Australians, the New Zealanders, and folks in India, are all looking to see if the United States is going to stand by our friends or whether we're going to walk away. Because if we're going to walk away, they'll make a deal with the Chinese. And so those are the choices. And, you know, when you listen to Trump and DeSantis and Ramaswamy, who say, we're going to go talk to Putin and convince him to be with us. Let me just tell you something. It is a joke. The people who are laughing correctly. Because Putin is a communist dictator, former KGB agent. He's got a lot more in common with the Chinese than he does with us. And believe me, he's not going to stop at Ukraine. If we let him get to Ukraine, the Baltic states are next, or Poland, and they're all part of NATO, everybody. Then we got a problem with American troops, because then we're going to have to send American troops. So let's invest in Ukraine now. Let's let them beat the Russians and do the right thing here. Last thing I'll say about Ukraine, I want you to remember something, because very few people are talking about this. In 1991, when the Soviet Union fell, in 1992, many of the Soviet Union's nuclear weapons were in Ukraine. We went to Ukraine and asked them to give them back to the Russians. The Ukrainians said, oh, hold on a second. We'd like to have those nukes to defend ourselves against the Russians. We said, don't worry about it. Give it back to them, and we'll protect you. Well, if our word's going to mean anything in the world, we better make sure we stand up and protect these folks, or any promise we make in the future, even if it's 30 years ago, people are going to start to second guess it, and that's going to diminish America in the world, and I don't think we want that. All right, last question. Where's the woman who was yelling at me? Are you still here? Do you want a question now or no? Yeah, you were the one who was said, like, interrupting, right? Or was the woman who was interrupting left? She left?
That was you.
All right. Well, who else has a question then? Yes, ma'am, over there. Wanted to make sure people knew I wasn't ducking her.
So I have a ton of questions to ask, but most of them have been addressed. The one I haven't heard, and I might have missed it, is with all that's going on in our country, how do we solve the problem of relationship with the police departments? They have such a terrible job. They go to work not knowing if they're going to come home, not knowing what's going to happen, and we have people who hate them because of the uniform they wear. What can we do, or what are you going to do to help out the men and women in blue?
Well, look, first off, I'm the only person on the stage running for president who's ever been in law enforcement. And I was the United States Attorney in New Jersey for the 5th largest office in the country for 7 years and worked with the men and women of law enforcement every day. And so, first off, I understand it from having done it. Second, look, law and order's got to apply to everybody in this country. And part of the problem we have is that people have thought that the laws are applied, you know, not fairly, and that some people get harsher treatment than others. To me, the way to make our system work is everybody is subject to the law, whether you're president of the United States or whether you work as a bartender here, and everybody in between. So you have to make sure that happens. Third, you have to make sure everybody hears directly from the president that we support the men and women in uniform who are our police officers, our federal agents every day, who are keeping us safe. Now, there are always going to be folks inside those organizations, like every organization, who make mistakes. And those people who make mistakes that are criminal, that are violent, should go to jail too. because the law has to apply to them. Fourth, when you look at the violent crime that's happening in this country right now, in our major cities, but also in other places as well, what you need to look at is the fact that these local folks are unwilling, these prosecutors, to prosecute the cases that need to be prosecuted. And so, as a result, what we need to do is, as president, I would take the attorney general and say to them, in the places where they're not prosecuting violent crime, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, to start, send in federal prosecutors and federal agents to do the job until the people locally understand that they have to do it themselves. America can't be a great country without great cities. And if we allow our great cities to deteriorate, you see some of the things we're seeing right now. The smash and grab robberies, the murders, the violent crimes that are happening all over this country. It's disgraceful. And we need someone who knows how to enforce the law as president and will override those locals if they're not going to keep law and order. And that's exactly what I do. So those are the things I would do. Well, the way we support the police officers is by doing that every day. If you're setting an example that the law is going to apply to everyone, and if you get arrested, you're going to go to jail, that's what those men and women want every day, is to understand that their work is not in vain. What drives them crazy is when they arrest someone and, 2 hours later they see them right back on the street doing the same thing. And it sends a message to those criminals that they can get violent with those officers and there'll be no ramifications. So they don't want us to do their job for them. They took the job because they love it and they want to do it. But they need to know that we're not going to automatically assume every time there's an incident that it was the police officer who was wrong in the incident. We need to make them understand that we believe that the folks who have volunteered to do this job and make it their life and their career did so because in their heart they believe that protecting and serving us is their calling. And if you have a president who's talking that way instead of talking about the problems with police all the time, I think it'll help to change the atmosphere and make their lives better, easier, and safer. All right. So, first off, I want to thank you all for coming. Thank all of the spirited members of the audience as well for keeping me on my game. I appreciate it. Your questions were really great, and I appreciate those as well. Let me say one last thing before I go. We don't have to accept what we have in this country right now. We don't have to accept the anger and the division and the inefficiency and ineffectiveness. We don't have to live in fear. We don't have to accept that. We're the country in the world that can change that ourselves. Not counting on anybody else to do it. But we're not going to change what's happening by not changing the people who are doing what's going on in this country right now. If we wind up this next fall with a choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden for president, we only have ourselves to blame. And all of you, look, I'm doing this. I never thought I'd run again. I ran 8 years ago. It didn't work out. I went back to my family, got back into the private sector, and felt like after 8 years as governor and 7 years as U.S. attorney, I contributed a lot to my country and to my state, and that it was time for me to do something else. But when I sat and watched my party have candidates who are unwilling to stand up and tell the truth, look, you've got two people from this state on that stage with me. And both of them raised their hand and said they would support a convicted felon for president of the United States. Look, to me, the conversation should be over at that point. Believe me, if John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington had thought they had to, they would have put in the Constitution not just 35 years of age and a natural-born American citizen, but not a convicted felon to be president of the United States. Washington and Adams and Jefferson never thought for a minute someone would have the audacity, like Donald Trump, to do what he's done to this country and then ask to be president again. So look, unlike the rest of the country, there are 3 states that will have the biggest impact on this race in the country. Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. You have the biggest impact on what's going to happen in this country. You are the presidential wine tasters of America. You're the ones who get to decide in the main who we get to pick next fall. Don't be willing to accept less than what this country has always been. Ronald Reagan said we were sitting on a hill, that we were the beacon of hope for the rest of the world, and we were, and we still are, but we need to become a beacon of hope for ourselves. We need to once again remember that all of this starts with what is in here, and what you're willing to say or not say, and then what you're willing to do to back that up. And I'll say this to you. It is not easy to be out in this race taking on Donald Trump. But I will tell you this. I wouldn't have it any other way, because he has lied to this country. He has disappointed this country. He has embarrassed this country. And he does not deserve to represent this country in the rest of the world. And I will fight for that every minute of this campaign. So I need your help. The best advice I ever got in politics came from President Bush 43. He said to me one day after he was at a speech that I gave, he said, "Governor, great speech. You're really good. I love what you're saying, but you forgot to ask for the vote." Man, he said, when you're in front of people, ask them for their support. People like to be asked for their vote. Don't just assume that they know you want it. Look them in the eye and say, I'm here because I want your vote. It was great advice. I am here because I want your support and your help. If you help me, let me tell you, there's only one person on that stage Donald Trump's afraid of. And you know it ain't Nikki Haley, and it ain't Tim Scott, and sure as hell ain't Ron DeSantis. There's one person on that stage he's afraid to get on the stage with, and let me tell you why. Because guys from New Jersey have been used to dealing with blowhards from New York for a long time. And he can avoid me now. But you keep me in this race, he can't avoid me forever. And when it comes down to when it's just me and him, after South Carolina, I think it's just going to be me and him. He's not going to be able to run away anymore. And Mr. TV tough guy, who tries to make sure he makes everybody convinced that he's so tough and he's so strong. I've known him for 22 years. He's a coward. He's running away from me. And when I get him on the stage, I'm going to end him. Thank you all very much.